Sankhya,
Sankhya,
analytical study of the material world.
analytical study of the material world.
Yoga,
Yoga,
work in devotional service.
work in devotional service.
Prithak,
Prithak,
different.
different.
Balaha,
Balaha,
less intelligent. Pravadanti,
Pradanti,
do talk.
Talk.
Na,
Na,
never.
no.
Panditaha,
Vivaha,
the learned.
Pradan.
Ekam,
Ekam,
in one.
one.
Api,
Api,
even though.
Yoga.
Astitaha,
Astitaha,
being situated. Samyak,
Samya,
complete.
complete.
Ubayoho,
Yoga,
of both.
both.
Vindate,
Tate,
enjoys.
joy.
Phalam,
Phalam,
result.
result.
Translation and prepared by His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada.
Jai
Srila
Srila
Prabhupada.
Prabhupada.
Translation. Only the ignorant speak of karma yoga and devotional service as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. Translation with repetition. Only the ignorant speak
Only the ignorant speaks.
of karma yoga
Karma yoga,
and devotional service
devotional service,
as being different
as being different
from the analytical study
from the analytical study
of the material world,
of the material world,
Sankhya.
Sankhya.
Those who are actually learned
Those who are actually learned
say that
say that
he who applies himself
he who applies himself
well to one of these paths
well to one of these paths
achieves the results of both.
achieves the results of both.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
The aim of the analytical study of the material world is to find the soul of existence. The soul of the material world is Vishnu or the super soul. Devotional service to the Lord entails service to the super soul. One process is to find the root. One process is to find the root of the tree, and the next to water the root. The real student of Sankhya philosophy finds the root of the material world, Vishnu, and then in perfect knowledge engages himself in the service of the Lord. Therefore, in essence, there is no difference between the two paths, because the aim of both is Vishnu. Those who do not know the ultimate end say that the purpose of Sankhya and Karma Yoga are not the same. But one who is learned knows the unifying aim in these different processes. Thus ends the transcendental Bhaktivedanta purpose. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Kauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyat Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna devotees. So today we are discussing the fourth verse of chapter 5, and the title for today's discussion is Different Spiritual Processes and Their Unifying Aim. So in this purport, in this translation, Srila Prabhupada talks about three terms, Bhakti Yoga or devotional service, Karma Yoga, and Sankhya. And are these different processes, or is there a common link between all of them? And if there is a common link, what is the common link or the unifying aim? And why are these called different spiritual processes? So as we saw in the today's verse, it says, Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha. So word Prithak means different. So there are people who are less intelligent, Balaha. What they see is that there is a difference between Sankhya the process of Sankhya, and the process of yoga. So Prabhupada translates here in work in devotional service. In the purport, Prabhupada translates that as karma yoga and devotional service. So there are a section of people who consider that these are different things. Pravadantina panditaha, the Lord is again saying that people who are not learned, they may say like this, or and then here it's being said, the vindati means one who enjoys. So here it is being said that whoever applies to one of these paths, ubhayor, he is going to enjoy the phala or the result. That means if one himself applies to one of these paths very well, then he can achieve the results of the both. Now, this is a very interesting question because Arjuna is further trying to understand what is the right method to do. Should I do karma yoga, or should I renounce the work? Should I engage in work? How do we understand? So here another description is about Sankhya, or the analytical study of the material world. So should one take to this path of Sankhya, or should one take to the path of work in devotional service? So how does these two differ? So Lord is trying to give his some unifying factors in these different paths. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada starts with this very important point called the aim of the analytical study of the material world. So whenever there is an activity that is done, there is also an aim. So just like whenever there is a path, there is a destination that is expected to be known. Because no one wants to traverse a path without understanding the destination. So here, Prabhupada is clarifying what is the aim of the analytical study of the material world. And Prabhupada is saying that it is to find the soul of existence. So we see the existence to be present around us, and what is the root of this entire existence. And Srila Prabhupada further elaborates some very wonderful points, which we'll try to look further in the purport, in the further slides. So the first point is to understand here, Sankhya Yoga Prithak Balaha. So what is Sankhya? So Sankhya, there is another word called Sankhya. Sankhya and the word Sankhya are two different words. Sankhya can mean either counting, or in some sense it also means to know something in detail. But Sankhya philosophy is that philosophy which is propounded by Lord Kapila Dev. And there's also another Sankhya teachings of atheist Kapila. But Srila Prabhupada says neither the Lord in Bhagavad Gita discusses about that atheistic philosophy, neither the Srimad Bhagavatam discusses about the atheistic Sankhya philosophy. So both in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, whatever Sankhya philosophy is discussed, that is discussed basically from the teachings of Lord Kapila. And furthermore, this philosophy of Sankhya is very briefly mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, but elaborately mentioned in 26th and 27th chapter of 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Kapila Muni is giving elaborate instructions on the creative elements. How does this material creation take place? So what are the fundamental creative elements which bring this entire existence, the material world, into the way it is? So this is a very important aspect to understand, especially for people who are interested to understand things by analytical study. So Sankhya is analytical study of the material world. So as we will see, the Sankhya is divided into 24 elements. So in understanding the material creation, as how does it come into existence, Lord Kapila Deva expounds it in 24 creative elements. It is also known as Chatur Vimshat Guna, the 24 elements. And what are these 24 elements? So these are the 5 gross elements, or Pancha Mahabhuta: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So these are the grossest. And then there are 3 subtle elements: Manas, Buddhi, Ahankara, that is mind, intelligence, and false ego. And then there are 10 senses, 5 Pancha Karmendriya and Pancha Jnanendriya. So these 5 and plus 5, 10 senses. So we have like 18 numbers covered so far. Then we have 5 sense objects or Panchamatra. The every sense has knowledge acquiring sense has a sense object. And the last 24th element is the contaminated consciousness. So these 24 elements are said to be the basis for this material creation. And as we will see in Srimad Bhagavatam, that Lord Kapila Deva explains more detailed way as how from Mahatattva, when that is agitated by the 3 modes of material nature, upon agitation, how does the world material existence starts coming up. So it is also described that it is so wonderfully designed by the Lord that this material existence is complete in itself. That means these 24 elements will act in such a way that it takes care of the maintenance of the material existence. That means the living entity, whatever is required for its completeness in terms of the existence in the material world is taken care by this modification of these 24 elements. And therefore, it is one complete unit, as we see in Ishopanishad, where it is mentioned as how everything that emanates from the Lord is complete and the Lord also remains complete. So this is one demonstration where Srila Prabhupada mentions that this study, Sankhya study, is known by the Western philosophers as metaphysics. And therefore, there is a branch in philosophy, especially in the Western world, where they study the understanding of the world from the metaphysical understanding. And this is what refers to Sankhya. Now, it is very important to understand that what is the use of the Sankhya philosophy? So one is to know that there is some sort of philosophy, but why is it important to study the analytical study of material world? So Prabhupada is emphasizing this point in the very beginning of the purport by saying the aim of analytical study of the material world is to understand the soul of existence. So this is very important to understand that, okay, we understand that this world is made up of 24 elements, but what is that is so signifying about this? So Srila Prabhupada explains by giving an example that imagine there are 24 elements which are present around us. We understand each of the elements very well. Now, Srila Prabhupada says, do you think that these material elements are acting on their own? So Prabhupada says that without the presence of the soul, that's why Prabhupada is using the word, soul of material existence. That means Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing on this point that without a spiritual touch, matter has no value. Srila Prabhupada gives the example that imagine there is matter lying there. Does it act on its own and without the effect of a human being? And Prabhupada gives the example of American continent. And Prabhupada says the land America was existing for a long time, but until the Europeans came here, although the land elements were present, it was not developed into such a beautiful place. So Prabhupada says only by the spiritual touch of the living entity that the material elements have meaning. So without understanding the spiritual touch behind the material existence, Prabhupada says it is not of great use of studying material, just simply studying the analytical aspects of the material world. So this is another very important point to note, that wherever we see that there is some action of matter, we must know that there is some spiritual touch behind it. So now the question is, okay, we understand that there is something beyond material existence or the simple study of analytical study of material world. So the next question would come is that what lies beyond the analytical study of the material world? So we saw that there is a spiritual touch behind the material existence. So what is that? How do we understand that? So Prabhupada gives further explanation to this. So Prabhupada says that one section of people, one section of sannyasis, what they do is that they usually take up the renounced order of life so that they can simply focus to not on the matter, but what lies beyond the matter. So they are not interested in matter because after studying analytically the matter, they come to understanding that this entire material existence is temporary in nature. The material existence is not really the true existence. There is something beyond this, which is the cause for this existence to come. And therefore, my focus of attention is to understand what lies beyond the analytical study of material world, or what lies beyond the material world. So they search after that supreme truth out of which the material existence comes out. And further, this they come after understanding the analytical study of this material world. So here, Prabhupada also defines that the word yoga is also important to understand. So now, Prabhupada defines the word yoga in relation to this, in the sense that when one understands the analytical study of the material world and knows that there is some supreme truth beyond the material world, and one makes connection with that supreme truth, that is known as yoga. So now when one understands that there is something supreme behind the material world, and when one tries to establish that relationship, that is known as yoga. So, so Prabhupada is again emphasizing that without establishing that connection with that supreme truth through yoga, all other studies are of no value. And therefore, Prabhupada gives another example. Imagine there is a straw in the street. There is grass in the street. You're trying to analyze that grass very, very well. But is that really meaningful? Does that help one understand the real meaning of life? Does it help one solve the problems of life? So simply studying for the sake of studying just the analysis of the material world without trying to establish one's connection with the supreme truth is useless. And therefore, people who are very intelligent, when they practice the Sankhya philosophy, they come to realize that the root of material existence is Vishnu. And they understand their position as subservient to Lord Vishnu, and thereby they engage in devotional service. So this is the conclusion that is reached by a proper Sankhya Yoga philosopher. By analytical study of philosophy, one would come to this. Now, the problem, one issue with this is, Prabhupada says, is that there are hardly any enough people who can actually understand things philosophically very clearly. Although this path is eventually meant to one to become a devotee, but one challenge is that people, Prabhupada says, that not many are philosophically inclined. Not many are intelligent enough to dissect the world and understand what are the fundamental elements and how do one analyze the ultimate truth behind this material creation. So this is one process of understanding Lord Vishnu and engaging in devotional service. Then there is another process that we follow that is known as the direct process. So the direct process means, Srila Prabhupada explains, by Sankhya Yoga philosophy, one comes to know that there is spiritual existence behind the material existence. So if one carefully studies, even in Bhagavad Gita, when Lord Krishna is talking about the Sankhya not in the Sankhya philosophy sense, but the analytical understanding of the body and the soul. The second chapter, the section is also known as the Sankhya section, where there is an analytical study between the distinction between the qualities of the soul and the qualities of the body. So by enumerating that qualities of the soul, one can come to understand that, yes, I'm not this body. So by that, one is able to appreciate the spiritual existence. But as we see in the purport Srila Prabhupada is giving, one level of understanding is to know that this is the root of the tree. I'm spiritual in nature. But the other part of that is to pour water to the root of the plant, or to perform activities on the spiritual platform. So while in the case of analytical process, one takes a lot of time to come to the root and then start pouring water. But the direct process, as we see, that is given in devotional service or bhakti yoga, the process is that one directly comes in contact with the spiritual existence. One, by performing devotional service, one is directly elevated to the spiritual existence, and he experiences the spiritual existence and is performing the activities in the spiritual existence. And therefore, there is a subtle difference, although in one sense there is similarity, that there is a unifying factor in both the process. The direct process is slightly, or in sense, especially meant for this age, is much, much beneficial. So one example that is given is that how do people who are practicing the direct process will come to know about all this knowledge? So one may say, oh, they are studying so much analytically and they understand the world so well. But what about devotees? They look very sentimentalist. They may not be understanding the truths, the philosophy behind it. So this verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada quotes, Krishna Surya Sama, Maya hoy andakar. Yaha Krishna, taha nahi Maya radhikar. So Krishna Surya Sama. So just like when we see that sun, when it rises, the darkness, andhakar, vanishes. Similarly, wherever there is Krishna, the effect or the illusory energy hides, goes away from that place. So yaha Krishna, taha nahi Maya radhikar. So wherever there is Krishna, there is no question of darkness because of illusion or Maya. So this is a very important principle to note. So how do devotees come to know about all these things? Sometimes they may not be studying, they may be just engaged in pure devotional service, but because they are in touch with Krishna, the illusion or ignorance will vanquish. And this is further stated in the Bhagavad Gita Chatushloki, where it is said, Tesham evanukampardham aham ajnanajam tamaha nashayami atma bhavasto jnana deepena bhasvata. So here Lord is saying, out of compassion for them, I dwelling in their hearts destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So this is the special mercy of the Lord. So wherever the Lord is present, why devotee is not in ignorance? Because the Lord who is present within the heart of the living entity, he is directing the living entity. He is giving knowledge, Divya Gyan Hridaya Prakashito. So by the mercy of the spiritual master, the Lord as Paramatma, one acquires this transcendental knowledge. The transcendental knowledge devotee acquires very easily. He doesn't have to spend so much time struggling, doing a lot of analytical study, because it is evanukampartham. Certainly by the mercy of the Lord, all the ignorance that is present, which is like darkness, so vanquished by the Lord, by shining the lamp of knowledge. So this is a very important principle. And in fact, this principle is often discussed, especially there are different kinds of Mayavadi philosophers who question this. Oh, you devotees do not study Vedanta. And therefore, how do we understand that you're knowledgeable? And the same question was put to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by Prakashananda Saraswati. So Prakashananda Saraswati, when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu meets in Varanasi, so this discussion goes on about, why are you chanting like a madman? You are a sannyasi. Why don't you read Vedanta? Why don't you become sober and read? Why are you acting like sentimentalist? So Prabhupada says, actually, that is not the fact. That is not true that a devotee is lacking in knowledge. So, here Prabhupada says, so the sincere devotee engaged in Krishna consciousness cannot be without knowledge. The Lord, if he is sincere in his devotional service, he is helped by Krishna himself within his heart. So this is a very important principle to note. that the transcendental knowledge is revealed, as we also see um, uh, this verse which says, Swayameva Spurati Adaha. Atha Shri Krishna Namadi Na Bhavet Grahyam Indrai Sevan Mukhe Hi Jivadav Swayam Spurati Evadaha. So, Swayam, so it gets manifested in the heart. So, today someone was also asking that how do we understand this transcendental knowledge? How do we develop faith? That faith, when, as we see, there are 4 stages, or the stages of bhakti: Ado Shraddha, Tata Sadhu Sangha, then Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti, and Nishtha. So when one is engaged in Bhajana Kriya and one progresses to, because of performing Bhajana Kriya, the Lord in the heart starts manifesting the transcendental knowledge, the spiritual master and the Lord. And by that, the anartha or unwanted things, the material desires in the heart start vanquishing. And as that process goes on, the faith, the nishtha of the devotee becomes more and more stronger. So why that nishtha comes? Because of bhajana kriya, because of rendering service to the Lord. The Lord within the heart manifests the required transcendental knowledge for the living entity. So the supreme truth, the supreme absolute truth, cannot be understand. The devotees understand the supreme absolute truth simply by the mercy of the spiritual master and the supreme Lord. It is not a question of scholarship. And the wonderful example is always given is that of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj. He was highest transcendentalist. He was fully immersed in the devotional service to the Lord. Although he did not know how to sign his name, but he was full of transcendental realizations. Where does that realization come from? Because of devotional service, the Lord within the heart manifests all required knowledge. So this is very important principle, that one of the things that we will see as we do devotional service is that one acquires causeless knowledge and detachment. As we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is mentioned that anyone who is practicing devotional service, he is bestowed with causeless knowledge, and because of that causeless knowledge, he also becomes detached from the material world. So this is one of the parameters that we need to pay attention when we are doing devotional service. Am I understanding the transcendental aspects of knowledge? Am I becoming at least inquisitive to know more? Am I becoming more and more detached to material things? If not, then there is something which is holding us back in the process. Or maybe there needs a better application, or maybe if we are doing it right, then maybe it's a matter of time. So that is a very important principle to note, that simply by Lord's touch, by Lord's mercy, the transcendental realization can happen in the devotee's heart. So with that said, so the direct process of understanding the ultimate truth and engaging in devotional service is much more direct process than the Sankhya philosophy. Now the question may come, if there are different processes, what is the unifying factor? We briefly saw that. Let's try to understand that even a little more better. So if one looks today in the material world, or in all times, in fact, there are different competing philosophies. There are different competing spiritual paths that are mentioned. However, Krishna is only mentioning only few here and making a comparison between work, renouncing work, or work in renunciation of work, or renunciation in work. Then the path of Sankhya is being discussed. Then the path of Jnana will be discussed. The path of Ashtanga Yoga will be discussed. So what are these different paths? why there are some paths are being recommended or discussed and why some paths are not discussed. Now, this is one may think, what is the necessity of knowing all these things? There is a necessity of knowing these things because when we encounter different paths, when we are not philosophically grounded and we are not philosophically convinced about what we are trying to do, we become sentimental. Prabhupada says, philosophy without religion is mental speculation, and religion without philosophy is sentiment. So most people who take to spiritual practices in different kinds are either sentimentalist or mental speculators. Mostly people are. But very rarely people have this both the abilities that they are philosophically grounded and they are practicing in the right way. The religious, the practical aspects of religion. So that is a very important principle that Srila Prabhupada has given us, that Srila Prabhupada has given us to understand the process with philosophical background. Because when there is philosophical background, one can remain steady, stable, in spite of various kinds of allurements from different processes. One person may have 1 million followers on YouTube. So sometimes people get bewildered. Oh, he is great. He is the real guru. He is the logical guru. He is most famous guru, and so on and so forth. And people start blindly following. But if you ask them, sir, do you know what is the philosophy behind his teaching? No, 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 I do not know. I do not want to know any philosophy. Why? Because simply by seeing him, it looks very good. Now, why do you think he's very good? Because I feel he is very good, because he has very good followers. So this is the mentality for large number of people. That's why they call it cult or blind faith. But actually, the teachings of Srila Prabhupada and Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, they are not giving us blind faith. They are not giving us just sentiment. They are fully encapsulated with the required philosophy, required knowledge. And Srila Prabhupada, as mentions in the I think preface or the introduction of Srimad Bhagavatam, that by acquiring this knowledge, one will not only make progress, but also can withstand the onslaught of the atheist or different kinds of people. So therefore, to carefully understand why their different paths exist, what is the same thing and what is not this unifying factor, is very helpful in studying our spiritual practices, our spiritual path, and also able to counteract people when required. So with that, why it is important, let's try to understand here. There are two paths, Sankhya Yoga, Pritak Balaha. So Sankhya, that is Sankhya philosophy, and the Yoga, which is Karma Yoga or devotional service, as Prabhupada mentions in the translation. What is the common thing between them? So Prabhupada says that one who is very learned, he sees things in a very different way compared to one who is not learned. So Balaha, Panditaha. So Balaha means one who is less intelligent, and Panditaha means one who is very learned. So a less intelligent man sees there is a difference. But here Prabhupada says a learned man sees that the goal that is achieved by any one of this process is equivalent or in the sense, this translation. So So Prabhupada says, only the ignorant speak of karma yoga and devotional service as being different from the analytical study of the material world, Sankhya. Those who are actually learned say that he who applies himself well to one of these paths achieves the results of both. So even if one is applying to one of these paths, they are getting the result of both. Now, what does this mean? So this Srila Prabhupada explains very well in one of his lectures, where Prabhupada says that the unifying factor between these different paths is absolute truth. What Srila Prabhupada says is that someone who is less intelligent, he will consider himself that, oh, I am Hindu, I am Muslim, I am Christian, or I have no faith. So usually people have these different conceptions that I am different from you, and therefore my path is different, and therefore one is thinking that I am supreme or I'm superior in some ways or the other. But the Prabhupada says one who is very learned, he's actually aiming for absolute truth. Satyam param dhimahi. He's actually trying to meditate on that absolute truth, be it any path that you take. The goal is to understand, realize, and serve and meditate on the absolute truth. That should be the goal of any learned man. And the goal of any process, a bona fide process, should be to take one to the absolute truth. Now, Prabhupada says it doesn't matter whether you go through Bhagavad Gita, you go through Bible, you go through Quran, you go through any text, but there should be clarity in terms of what is the aim of life. If your aim of life is to understand the absolute truth, then there is no difference, because the goal is one, is to understand the absolute truth, and therefore there is a unifying factor in all the different paths. But if your aim is something else, then you find some difference from Bhagavad Gita to Bible, Bible to Quran, Quran to some other text, and so on and so forth. So this is a very elevated understanding. In a world where sectarianism in different forms is taking place, people who are less intelligent, they find this artificial, material, or time, place, circumstantial differences between different paths, and they tend to neglect things. But the common factor, if one pays attention to, is to understand the absolute truth. Now, in this case, Lord Krishna is explaining that Sankhya Yoga or Karma Yoga, whichever path you take, there is no difference, because ultimately they both are trying to help one lead towards the ultimate absolute truth. And in that sense, whether it is Sankhya Yoga, they are not prithak, they are not different. Rather, they both take vindate phalam. They both lead one to the results, the same result. So, in that sense, Panditaha, who is very learned, he sees this commonality between the different parts. But who are not very learned, they see only the differences, and they start fighting amongst themselves, saying this is better than that, and so on and so forth, based upon some other smaller differences that exist between different religious or spiritual paths. Now, having said that, Prabhupada also explains that there is a difference between the different religions or different paths, in the sense that also the truth is one, although the absolute truth is one, but based upon the level of the individual, it can be realized or understood in different ways, or it can be presented to different degrees about the same absolute truth. And Prabhupada gives this answer that, for example, people study A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth, basic letters in school. And there was this one child who was also began to say A, B, C, but he was saying because he was constructing a triangle and he was trying to do some trigonometry. So trigonometry also, there are angles between the sides of the triangle and so on and so forth. And therefore, he's making, this is a straight line between A and B, this is a straight line with B and C. So he's saying A, B line, B, C line, and so on and so forth. So the mother is thinking, oh, what is this? I mean, he's learning ABCD again. What is this? Although it looks like it is the same ABCD, but actually this ABCD is not same as what the alphabets that one learns. So here the ABCD are applied in a higher context of trigonometry, whereas the other ABCD that is learned is just to understand the basic elementary ABCD. So the position of certain scriptures in certain countries, in certain circumstances, may be described in a certain way, but the aim is one. But the difference is that there are higher mathematics and there are lower mathematics. So the aim is one in the sense of the study of mathematics is one, but when it comes to study of mathematics of a smaller child and the mathematics that is studied in a PhD level, at a university level is much more complex. So similarly, although the unifying aim, although there is certain difference based upon the time, place, and circumstances of how that absolute truth is being presented in the bona fide religion and the bona fide paths, but based upon the interest or the ability of the receiver, according to time, place, circumstances, there are different degrees of details are being presented. And therefore, there is also this difference in the sense that the aim is one, but to the degree that is being presented is different. So therefore, it is being said that if one follows Shastra with him, so if one follows a proper bona fide process, one should make advancement in understanding the absolute truth. And when one makes further progress in whatever path he goes, then he sees, oh, I've learned this. I think there's still something more to learn. And just like one who learns a little bit of mathematics in 7th grade, 8th grade, he sees that there's still more mathematics to learn. This is not the end. And therefore, even though one is taking to fewer paths, which may not give the complete understanding, but when one makes advancement by Shastra with him, by the process of following those scriptural injunctions carefully and reaching to a certain point, he will see, oh, I think there is still something more remaining to learn. When he is in that position, the Lord further guides him to acquire the higher mathematics or the higher aspects of the absolute truth. So in that way, there is a unifying factor, and there is also a difference in the sense that some are direct process, some are more higher, just like higher mathematics and lower mathematics. Some describe the details of the absolute truth and the realization in a more detailed way, in a more direct way, and some are not so direct way. But here, Krishna is saying that whether you take Sankhya Yoga or you take Karma Yoga, the aim of both of them is same, and therefore in one path you try to understand the root of the existence, and after understanding the root of existence, that is there is spiritual existence beyond the material existence, and my relation to that spiritual existence, the source of that spiritual existence, Lord Vishnu or Krishna, is to render service unto him, and therefore one acquires same thing simply by rendering devotional service, which is much more direct process, and therefore the eventual aim of rendering service to the Lord and being freed from the material contamination is present, is a unifying factor in both Sankhya and the Karma Yoga process and the devotional service process. And therefore, Lord is describing that there is a certain unifying aim in these processes. So that is a very interesting verse to see what are the unifying aspects in different paths mentioned in Bhagavad Gita and how they're also slightly different. So with that, I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, how do we see that which process has a more long-term effect, and how we are being changed by the same process? If we have certain temptations and we keep following spiritual path, and after a while we see that I'm having same desires. So is this process really working for me? Or I'm sure it's working for me, but what should I do which will be different, and how I can learn what other paths have helped people and can integrate into my practice also? Like, that's what I'm asking. Like, even after years, and I see that people, I am having like same desires and things like that.
Yes, so that's a very relevant and appropriate question. That how do we measure ourselves? How do we see? So one important process is sadhu sangam. So sadhu sangha really helps us in terms of. So one of the thing is that the natural tendency of the living entity is not to be under the control of an authority. And when we are not in the control of an authority, the mind starts acting. And therefore, we get succumbed to the temptations or the needs of the mind. That is one point. Uh, on the other hand, when we are in the association, naturally there is a greater strength. So practicing together. So let's say if you're not together in the sense you're physically far, but still, if you seek association, that means if one reads Prabhupada books, if one hears Prabhupada's lectures, if one hears even the audiobooks that are being made of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, if that becomes our constant source of engagement, then our propensities towards material inclinations will reduce. To the extent we do devotional service, that means we take association. So this is challenge for everyone. The only way to out is Krishna Surya Sama. Is somewhere or other we have to bring Krishna. And that is practically possible by chanting and hearing about Krishna. And in the rest of the time to engage our senses in the service of the Lord under the guidance of devotees. So we need practical engagement. So one good way to associate with devotees is to do some service. So even though one may be far, but just to do some small service. Prabhu, is there something that I can do? Can I type something? Can I do something? Even if it's a small thing, just to do service will help one get more association of devotees. Similarly, if one keeps hearing, so nasta prayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya. So this hearing process is very, very important. It's just like we are taking bath, but very next day when we sleep and we wake up, we find again, the dullness, the dirt being accumulated. So every day there will be dirt that will be accumulated. So the everyday cleaning is important. So it is not to be worried that, oh, dirt has come back again. Dirt will come. Till we become nishta, or our ruchi is not developed, we will be pulled by different things. But with enthusiasm and with patience, one should continue the process. And if there are any questions, one must hear from devotees who have greater faith and see how this is the best process. This is actually the best process. There is no other process which is better than this. So stick to it. Always seek association of devotees who are having greater faith, who are doing more devotional service, and engage in different services. Thereby the mind and the senses are engaged. And in that way, it's easy to handle them and not allow them to move here and there. Does that help in some? So idea is to bring Krishna. Idea is to bring Krishna again and again. We will be prone because we are conditioned in our lives for so many lifetimes. So somewhere or other we have to bring Krishna. We have to bring Krishna into our minds and engage our senses, our tendencies to serve Krishna. We have to do that repeatedly. Even if we fail millions of times, we should still continue doing that. Do that. And that way, Lord will see, oh, he's again coming back, and he will reciprocate. Spiritual master, the Lord will reciprocate by giving you more strength. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Prabhu. Keep trying,
And
getting guidance.
always stay in association. Association is the key. Association is very, very important. Together, even wherever you are there, even if you can invite people to chant together or join together chanting sessions wherever is happening, that will all give strength. Just being together is a great strength. Sankirtana, there is bala in Sankirtana. So togetherness, the more we do togetherly, although individually it is to be performed, but in togetherness, by coming together, and glorifying the Lord. That has a lot of strength. So keep this one word. If you don't understand everything, Sankirtan has a lot of bala. Ankit Prabhu, you have any comments?
No, Prabhuji, just to add whatever you have said. Today, I was so astonished after seeing one American. He came to me, and because he took that book other day, and he was like telling me about Krishna, and he was very eager to know who is Krishna and all, right? So he read that book, and today he met with me, and he was sharing the experience. So, and he asked me the address of the temple. Then I said definitely I'll share that with you. He's staying next to my door. So he was very he was feeling that bliss after reading like maybe 1 or 2 chapters even. So
Yes.
association part is really important, Prabhuji.
The process works, and it's the most scientific process. There is Bhagavatam as Sankhya philosophy. It is also talking about how philosophically the entire phenomenal material. So it's not the Vaishnava literatures by the mercy of Goswamis and the other previous acharyas, Srila Prabhupada. We also have the knowledge, whatever is required for us. So if we simply take shelter of them and engage in small services, the process works. And this is another testimony of how a random person reads Prabhupada's books and feels to come to temple. And thank you. Very nice to hear this. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, I would request everyone to come in front of the camera. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Prabhupada ki, Granthiraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Gita Gaur Premanante. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Vibhu.